Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the palatial FYC studios, you are listening to For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm your host, Dustin Friesenand.
And I'm your host, Mike Josic, and we would like to welcome you to the podcast. If you're a regular listener of the show, it's good to see you back, and if you are a brand new listener, we just want to warn you in advance, spoilers ahead. So at the end of our last episode, it was kind of I was torn between two different movies, and obviously, I mean, the title is on the episode. You see it coming in when you're clicking on it to listen to it. So everybody here knows that the episode that got chosen between the two, I don't remember what the other one was. I thought it was Koyaanisqatsi, but Dustin's telling me off mic that it isn't. So today,
just that I'm not sure.
So today we are going to be discussing the 1968 Italian cult classic action crime comic book adaptation of Angela and Luciana Giussani's highly regarded fumetti, Danger Diabolik.
AKA Danger Diabolik's girlfriend. Because quite frankly, I think everything he was doing was just to impress her.
It kind of was. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the credits here, and Dustin and I can get to chatting about the film and stop wasting everybody's valuable time. So Danger Diabolik was directed by Mario Bava. Screenplay was by Dino Maiuri, Brian Degas, Tudor Gates, and Mario Bava. Story was by Angela and Luciana Giussani, Dino Maiuri, and Adriano Baracco. It's based on Diabolik by Angela and Luciana Giussani. Produced by Dino De Laurentiis. Starred John Philip Law, Marissa Mell, Michelle Piccoli, Adolfo Celli, and Terry Thomas. Cinematography was by Antonio Rinaldi. Edited by Romana Fortini. Music by the legendary Ennio Morricone. Distributed by Paramount Pictures in the US, with a release date of January 24th, 1968 in Italy. The film is fairly well regarded in cinephile circles. It's a bit of a cult classic. It is considered one of the best comic book adaptations of a film. It's a highly celebrated Mario Bava film. It was distinguished by being the film that closed out Mystery Science Theater 3000's 10-year run.
Now that I wouldn't mind have seeing instead.
And was featured, parts of it were featured famously in a Beastie Boys video for Body Movin', which I don't know if we'll get to talking about that, but there are reasons.
Well, I will say that actually explains why the only thing that was written on the summary when I saw it on YouTube was from a Body Movin', or used in a Body Movin'. I guess somebody just uploaded it because of the Beastie Boys. So
very possibly. Where does the film sit on the Sight and Sound list, Dustin?
It sits with so many others at 894th on the critics poll, due to one critic voting for it.
Perfecto.
Good enough. That's what we say. D for diploma.
So for anybody who cares, I like to occasionally mention where I have seen the film, what media I watched it on. And in this case, it was the 2020 Shout Factory release on Blu-ray. Really nice presentation of the film. Great audio, great picture. Nice special features, some commentaries. And highly recommend checking it out if you have access to it. It's still available. You can buy it on Amazon. You can find it at your local physical media store. Support physical media.
Support physical media. Screw Amazon.
That's right. And, you know, with the way streaming and stuff is going right now, if you're into physical media, it's good to stay into physical media and to continue supporting it, because shit's getting real out there, folks.
And as I've implied or mentioned before, I saw it on YouTube where somebody just uploaded it for free, which doesn't really support anybody.
And you can actually, at least one of the special features has been ripped and posted onto YouTube and has not been taken down. So if you are sailing those pirate seas online and you are curious, it's a decent little featurette. It's got Steve Bissette and some other people talking about the original fumetti and the adaptation. Enjoyable.
Is it pirating if you watch it on YouTube?
It's pirating for the person to rip it off of the original media and to move that to YouTube.
True enough.
I don't think the piracy is actually you watching it, because technically it's there on YouTube. And if nobody's policing it, then it's just kind of there for consumption, kind of a finders keepers thing, I think. But the poster.
Watch it before it gets taken down, I guess.
The poster is definitely engaging in piracy. Anyways.
Anywho.
So Dustin, as we usually do, can you give us a quick synopsis of the film and kick us off with your first impressions of Mario Bava's Danger Diabolik?
Danger Diabolik is about the titular character, Diabolik, going around effectively messing with the government, with gangsters, with the police, just stealing crap that they don't want him to steal. And that's honestly pretty much the plot. It doesn't get too much further than that, except for the fact that in order to try and catch Diabolik, the police decide to blackmail a notorious gangster into finding him for them.
It is actually more of a, like, there is a lot less plot, and it's more just kind of like spotlighting his adventure, the character, kind of developing the relationship between Diabolik and Inspector Jinko, who's trying to catch him, and Valmont, the mobster, who is helping to try to catch him. And when I say developing, I use that loosely.
Very loosely. I would claim that there is zero development in any relationship in this film. Everything is at the beginning as it was at the end.
I guess vignettes. Vignettes is probably a really good way of describing it. A series of vignettes kind of strung together with the basic plot is catch Diabolik.
During the 3 heists that he pulls off. And jumping into my impressions, I was going to try to do an impersonation of somebody and didn't come up with one fast enough and felt like it wouldn't work too well. So I'll just lampshade that. Going into Danger Diabolik, I was worried. It said comedy and 1967.
It said comedy.
It said comedy. And I sort of see what they're talking about.
I mean, it's campy.
It's definitely campy. I didn't see any, it felt like they were playing it straight right up until the moment when they started panning across that vehicle at the beginning, and all of a sudden the music immediately turns in the most grotesque manner into just this janky sort of campy music. Like, where the hell is this coming from? That is not the tone that you had literally 1 second ago. And it was so jarring. And at that point, I knew I was in trouble. It did not quite recover. The intro song that they have, what was it? Deep, 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 deep into you.
It was like Deep Down or something.
Deep Down. And they play it over and over again. It is not a good song. When I saw that Ennio Morricone did the music, I was actually sorely disappointed. I was like, really? I'm not hearing it. And every song in this movie is garbage, except for the one that they play at the raid on the club. I actually really dig that song. I had to text you about it because I was digging that tune. So I highly recommend everyone listen to that tune and then just play the rest on mute.
Ouch.
Ouch. Burn sauce. As you said, the film is essentially a series of vignettes. And as I said, there's not really any development of anyone at any point. I found it hard to care about most anything that was going on. I didn't feel there was any tension or suspense in these heists.
I do think I probably used development incorrectly. I think I was trying to say they reveal a little bit more about the characters as time goes on, but the characters, they don't actually develop in the sense that they have an arc. It's just you meet Diabolik and then you find out that Diabolik has, his partner Eva Kent, and then you find out that he's also he's got this thing going on with Inspector Jinko, and he's got, the criminals don't like him, the police don't like him. He's basically like an anarchist and a terrorist. So it's not so much development as you just learn more about who he is as time goes on and as the heists go on. Little bits kind of roll out.
Though there are some things that you definitely do not learn ever. And that's, as this crazy anarchist that he is, who did he pay to build his crazy underwater fortress? Because like it's just him and his girlfriend, and it was not them who built it. That is for sure. He's spending way too much money on his temporary latex costumes because that
There
is
was
skin tight.
there was a great line in the. I did watch the Mystery Science Theater episode. I had to basically kind of. I watched this in a rare instance. Usually, Dustin watches something like 2 months before I do because I tell him to, and then I just don't get around to it. And then I finally get around to it, and Dustin's like, "Ah, shit, I gotta go and I gotta refresh." This time, I needed to refresh because I'd seen this a couple months ago, and rather than just watching the film again, I thought I'm gonna watch the Mystery Science Theater because I'll get the refresh, but then I'll also have new texture, new content. And I'm not sure which scene it was exactly, but it was one of the scenes in the lair. And one of the MST3K guys, he's like, I feel like it's kind of a waste of money to build an observatory in an underground lair.
Well, what do you know about observatories? You're not an astronomologist.
Speaking of the lair, though, like one of the things that's kind of really cool about this movie is that it was actually made. Bava had access to more money. Dino De Laurentiis was going to give him more money. He was like, "I'm going to give you $5 million to make this movie," and he's like, "I'll do it for 500,000." And Bava was an innovator with effects and visual trickery, and probably like 80% of the sets in that movie are just matte paintings. And he was just using camera angles and, like tricks that Jackson was using in Lord of the Rings by positioning people in different places and having things closer to the camera and characters and objects farther from the camera, and just really playing with the tools that were available. And it, to me, it kind of gives the film, I think he's very successful in creating scope where there is none. And
I'll agree with that.
I also really dig the design sense and like the layers and the castles and the places that the heists are going on. Like it feels very comic booky and campy without being comical in my mind. Like it's got that sort of 60s James Bondian sort of vibe. I've often heard it compared to the 60s Batman series because the Batman series was campy and colorful. And this is very much embracing the Diabolik fumetti. Fumetti, just in the same way that the French refer to graphic novels as like bande dessinée. In Italy, they're fumettis for anybody who doesn't know, which I believe just means like puff of smoke. That's a rock fact. Anyways, it gets compared to Batman, but Batman was camp, but it was definitely going for a more comical, adventurous vibe, whereas this one it's campy, but it's more serious and more subversive and more sensual. I mean, it's an incredibly sexual movie, not just because it has like some, long love scenes and lots of smooching and touching, but just the way that it indulges in all of these sensual delights, whether it's this gigantic lair or, I mean, after that first heist, he's about to put the money in the safe and he's like, I could put $10 million in the safe, or I could just bury us in it naked in bed and we can have sex on it.
And we will show that scene for way too long. They sit on it for what, 2-3 minutes, and it's like, we're good. They're making out. I get it. This isn't a porno. We're not going anywhere with this. The pacing was just all over. And you say that it felt a bit more serious. I actually think it was a bit more cartoonish than even comic booky, simply because if you're watching something that's campy, even like the 60s Batman's running into whatever situation, and then he has the ridiculous utility belt that always has whatever he needs. But in theory, they're at least, doing some detective work and doing some stuff. Whereas here, Diabolik just happens to know everything that's going on and have exactly what they need, like some sort of cartoon character from Looney Tunes who's just coming in and taking it away with the most ridiculous nonsense. They seal just 1 million pounds of gold in a single large brick in a big entombed case, and Diabolik happens to know exactly where it is, brings it down, happens to have the machines to bring it straight to his base, and then the tools to get the gold right out. When they do the switch with the millions of dollars at the beginning, he knows exactly what's going on, and there's no explanation as to how he knows any of this. He just knows everything that they're doing at all times. And it seems almost like he's a side character that just comes in like a jerk, while the main characters are supposed to be just trying to thwart him in any way, shape, or form.
I've never read any of the original comics, but I have read some European comics where you do have this thief-like character or lovable rogue, and they may be the main character, but you get less information about them. It's more about, the people who are trying to catch them and chase them. I kind of got the vibe that that was what was going on here with Diabolik. Like, you're just supposed to sort of take him as this force of nature,
He's
and
basically the Roadrunner.
he's just so good at what he does that you just sort of take for granted that, yeah, of course, he knows how to get this like 20-ton gold ingot back to his headquarters in his lair. And of
Of
course,
course,
he
he's
has
got a
this.
gun that you just load emeralds into and it'll fire it like bullets without gunpowder somehow. Don't even worry about it.
And of course, he just happens to have the poison that'll put him down for 12 hours, and then he wakes up when he gets the antidote. Or
At 11 hours and 57 minutes,
yeah,
because of course.
but it's all done sort of like straight faced. It's not. There's no wink and nudge to the camera, which is what I meant by it's more serious. Like Batman.
Minus the campy music right there as they're panning across. Like, I don't, as I said, that ruined any serious tone for me for the entire film. There's no recovering from that music.
I do think that the that first cue by Morricone did throw me off, but it is there to. You've got that really cool guitar thing to introduce Diabolik. It's that like it's the cool stuff, and then you're showing the police, and you get that which is just like the comical because they're kind of dullards, and Diabolik is obviously tripping them up at every turn, and all the authority figures are played a little bit broad and a little bit over the top. Jinko is one of the few who's actually played like you can kind of respect Jinko. He knows what he's doing. He's up against an incredibly competent foe, and he's part of an incredibly incompetent institution. And I felt that the music was kind of communicating that and the way that it would change throughout the film. I will agree that the Deep Deep Down song, that theme song, runs a little too long. But for me, as far as Morricone's score goes, I thought it really underscored the film quite well. And it's working on a few levels. You've got this very like aggressively quick, not a lot of information, not a lot of plot kind of writing. It's just bang, bang, bang. Here's this, this is happening. Now this is happening. Plus you have this incredible like visual storytelling from Bava with his, ridiculous grand scope matte paintings from the very first scene with those buildings where they're transferring the money from. Like that's all a matte painting, and then you move through the film and it's just painting after painting after painting, and then you've got that music, and they're all working to create a tone and a mood. And I think they move around a lot, and I think they dance really well together, for lack of a better word. And obviously
As
you
I
didn't feel that way.
as I usually say, I notice this music if it's really good or if it's really bad. And I felt that it was really bad the whole time. It was really taking me out of it, especially when, as I said, scenes would drag on, as far as I'm concerned, way too long. The pacing was not that good in a lot of places, which is actually fairly typical for films around this time where they're not trying to constantly give you that adrenaline all the time. And it's fine to let you sit on something if you've got something to sit on, but I didn't feel that there was at any point.
And it's an Italian film, so it doesn't necessarily have the same sort of needs or expectations that an American film might have in the same period. I haven't seen a lot of Italian films. I've seen a
Most of the
couple.
Italian films that I've seen, especially from around the 70s or 80s, are like Full Cheese Zombie 2 or Cannibal Holocaust, that kind of video nasty nonsense. So
I've seen La Dolce Vita.
you've seen
Got
Salo.
I've seen Salo. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a collection. It's like a film magazine where they got all of these Italian filmmakers to do these basically short films, kind of showing you. It was all about like love in Rome, and they were these little stories. They were supposed to be slices of life or whatever. But in the limited exposure I've had to Italian cinema, it's got a more luxurious pacing to it. It doesn't necessarily play in the same way that American films of the same periods of the films that I've seen that are Italian would, which is why I'm saying what I'm saying and essentially repeating in a very circular sort of way what I said only a couple minutes
You're
ago.
saying the pacing is that way due to culture. I'm saying it's that way due to era. So
I think it's both. Why not both?
a thing can be two things.
It's also an interesting, it's kind of a sidebar. It doesn't necessarily have a lot of bearing on, whether this film ends up being a masterpiece or a museum piece, but in that little featurette that I was watching about the what is it called? It's like from fumetti to film. They talked quite a bit about how this movie and Barbarella were kind of two comic book adaptations with a European flavor, and
Happening at the same time.
Barbarella is definitely sort of the more popular, but if you look at the two, Barbarella is a film made by somebody who's looking at the comic book frame and seeing a series of static images, whereas because the camera doesn't move that much in Barbarella, but you look at Danger Diabolik and what Mario Bava does, Bava understands that the role of the comic book artist, of the cartoonist, is to use this two-dimensional space and try to convey action and movement. And so he really embraces that. He embraces the energy and the tone and the mood of what the Diabolik comics were trying to convey, and does so, in my mind, rather successfully. When the movie's not being kind of languid, it's being quite kinetic and sometimes almost comically so. But I think it's actually quite a good adaptation of a comic book. I do think it's quite successful in that regard.
I honestly have a hard time agreeing or disagreeing there because I haven't read the comic, so I don't know what the feeling of the comic is supposed to be.
Nor have I.
And I find that it's important to understand what the tone of the comic is supposed to be to really be able to say if it's a good interpretation of it. Even if it's something that's trying to strike out on its own, there's certain things where it's like, why did you even bother throwing that name on it? The Uncharted movie now, like, it has nothing to do with the game series. Why have Uncharted on it? Like, it's not like it's a bad movie. It's good enough. It's a popcorn film, but there's no need to add the name to it. So if it's striking out on its own from the fumetti, why throw the Diabolik name on it? Or if it's very accurate to the feel of the comic, I would not know. I've definitely read some stuff about how the paintings give it sort of that comic book feel by having the static image that they have the stuff moving in front of. But I honestly never noticed the matte paintings myself. Maybe it's just that I'm used to seeing that in that era, so it just goes over my head.
Yeah, I knew that matte paintings were being used. Like, it's just anytime you have sets of the scope of like the underground layer, I mean, there's no way that, parts of that aren't matte painting. I didn't realize how much was a matte painting. Like, they would literally set up, oh, there's like a ladder and some stairs here, and then they just put a matte painting over it, and the way it looks is like someone's actually entering the space and walking through like a pedway. And the level of photographic trickery kind of astonished me when I found out just to what extent the matte paintings were being used. Because yeah, up until, what was it, like the 90s, maybe the late 80s, like matte paintings were still being used quite frequently and quite heavily.
I mean, as long as you're blending in nicely and it's not looking like bad green screen, then it's all fine and dandy, however you do it.
And there are some crazy, like, cheap ass effects in this movie too.
It is 67, so the driving is going to be wonky. And didn't they do the thing where they speed up the driving?
They undercrank the camera, yeah.
Yeah.
And they
That
also
always looks so bad.
like the scenes with planes. There's a couple scenes with planes, and those are not always the best. Some of the compositing was not the best.
The shots from inside when they're like shooting at a car, it actually looked pretty decent, but then it would go to something else and it would just be wonky as heck. It jumped all over the place.
I will say, having watched the Mystery Science Theater version, I'm not sure where they got their copy from, but it certainly wasn't the Shout Factory Blu-ray. It looks and plays a lot better. It's a much more visually consistent and fulfilling movie. Even the audio felt like it was synced up better, because the way the Italians would shoot is they wouldn't actually use any sound on stage. They would just do the dialogue and film, and then afterwards it would get dubbed. So like all Italian films are dubbed. That's just how they do it there. And the MST3K version, it looked like it was poorly dubbed, and I think it was just an old edition or a shitty release or something, because the Shot Factory one just plays a lot better. I enjoyed it so much more.
It's a weird thing, that dubbing, because when you see a film that was dubbed from a different language, it is so striking and obvious. I can't do it. I have to do subtitles. But here, like, I could tell it's dubbed, but at the same time, it's close enough that you're never really dragged out of the film by it.
Well, they're speaking English in the film. It's an English speaking film that's dubbed in English.
It is, but the lips, they never quite match up perfectly. That's the thing. Sometimes
Yes.
they do, sometimes they don't.
Yes.
It's not like they're continuing a sentence on after the mouth stops moving sort of deal, which is the egregious kind of bad dubbing. But it's sometimes you catch it and it feels a little bit off. Not enough that it's something that I'd consider a big complaint. Learning that it's an Italian filmmaking thing to do back in the day, that explains a lot.
I also want to applaud the performance of John Philip Law as Diabolik. He doesn't have a lot to say. In fact, it might be a good half an hour into the movie before you even hear him say any words. It takes a while.
He doesn't really
And
have any repartee with too many guys.
yeah, and he doesn't even talk all that much with Eva. They just basically
Make out.
make out and fuck. So, but he's a very good physical performer. Like he adds energy to scenes where not a lot is happening just because he knows I need to move my body or I need this motion to be broad. It's kind of like when you hear like voice actors talking about when you can't act with your body, you have to sort of go big with your voice. And when you go big with your voice, it actually plays fairly level in like an animated series. And here he's not using his voice, all he has is his body. So he's kind of going big with his body. And whether he's driving or whether he's fighting or whether he's
Preventing himself from blinking for 3 minutes at the end.
I I was impressed. I was impressed with the costume. I was impressed with his physicality. He's a striking figure. He's a striking kind of character, and I thought fairly interesting to watch on film. I also thought that Marissa Mel was also quite interesting to watch. I was kind of impressed because they kind of they play up the sexuality, but I never felt like they went like straight into exploitation. Like
I could agree with that.
there was kind of the line there that they wouldn't cross, and I really appreciated that. And it felt like her character was complicit in it all and having fun with it all. Like this was all part of the gig for the character, not for the actor. But
I'd almost argue that she was having more fun than he was. She
yeah,
got to do the fun parts. He had to do the hard stuff. And it didn't really mention why they were doing any of the heists or what they were doing with anything except for the necklace, which she specifically said, "Oh, the price of a date with me is an emerald necklace."
yeah.
I was like, all right, I guess we can do that.
Another factor of this being an Italian film, I think there probably would have been some assumption that the audience would be familiar with the character. It was a very popular comic book, very popular character. It's kind of like you make a Batman movie and you could do it without doing like a whole bunch of background because it's just kind of part of the cultural consciousness.
Also, we've
Um,
seen Batman's parents get shot 47 times already.
which
We're
is the
good.
hilarious part of it. Yeah.
Whereas here we have nothing, nothing to work off of. Can't even find any other media except for the comics to figure out what the heck's up with Diabolik.
Because I think there are scenes in the film that are taken almost directly from the fumetti. So, I mean, you have Italians making it. It's an Italian comic book. There has to be an assumption that this extremely popular character and series that people know it and that you can just make this movie and that people will, be able to intuit stuff. But I mean, it's also being made for an international audience. So, I don't know, maybe they're just assuming it's a simple enough concept that people will just catch on or that it's just kind of stylish and sexy and interesting enough. I
Though
mean,
apparently not as sexy as Barbarella with her orgasm machine. That was a dumb scene. And I've seen enough James Bond to know how that goes. But I feel that James Bond sort of works better as a as a spy film than this does. At least there I have something to care about. That's the thing. I like my vignettes. I like my anthology stories, but even the short story has to have something to it. As you said, if I knew the Diabolik character, maybe I could care a bit more, but I don't, so I don't, which is definitely a negative in terms of this film.
I also respect the fact that at no point does this film feel like we're struggling because, like, we're doing this because we don't have money to do anything better. This film is very comfortable in its own skin. Bava himself, as I said, turned down many dollars because he's like, I can do it cheaper.
I mean, you have better catering. Come on. Just
And like this film is exactly what this film wants to be. And in some ways, I guess it's kind of like Diabolik himself, where he's going to do things the way he wants to do them. He's going to just engage the world the way he wants to engage with it, and he doesn't give a shit what you think of his politics or his personality or anything. He's out to please himself. And I felt like this movie, while it is a populist film and it is an adventure movie that's definitely trying to be a commercial film, like I said, it's super comfortable in its skin. I'm sure Bava was very pleased with it. Everybody who I've seen speak about the film is thrilled to have been involved with it. It has really strong, cult status. The people who love this movie adore this movie. It's its own thing on its own terms, and I can really kind of respect it for that.
bit of a tangent, but going back to Bava turning down the money, do you think Carpenter should have done that with his more recent films when he started getting more money?
I don't know. I mean, I think the reason Bava did it was I think he was a bit of a showman, and I think he was like, watch me achieve this with these incredible innovations and things that I plan on doing where I don't need to build sets. I'm just going to paint a matte painting and be amazed. Whereas with Carpenter, I think probably getting access to more resources got him a different quality of actor.
And usually it's just that usually I hear a lot of people talking about how Carpenter did more with less than he did when he had more.
Well, there's different levels of Carpenter too, because, once you start getting into like the late 80s, the mid to late 80s, the stuff kind of like Post Thing.
I'm thinking like the aughts, like in Sanitarium and stuff.
Oh, The Ward?
The Ward.
Well,
The
The Ward
Ward.
was his last film. And
For now.
to my knowledge, he hasn't really made anything for more than $10 million for a very long time. And to a certain degree, like to make a movie in the States, especially with a studio, like you're talking sort of minimum $5 million. There are obviously exceptions, but
Those are usually indie films that just blew up.
and to my knowledge, like I don't think Carpenter, I think he made most of his films in the US or nearby. I mean, I just saw the film Barbarian, which is amazing. And it was made for like $4.5 million, but they made it in Bulgaria. And I've heard it described as the film Wes Craven would have made if he was still with us. And I definitely get that vibe. But I bring that up just to say like it's sort of the current low budget amazing thing in horror, and it's still $4.5 million, and it was made in Bulgaria, taking place in Detroit. Whereas I don't think, with the exception of like The Thing, I can't think of another film off the top of my head where Carpenter traveled to like the middle of nowhere to make a movie for the tax breaks or whatever. And I think
Jumping back to Diabolik, though.
yeah, and I think Bava, turning down the money. I don't know what the situation with the film industry in Italy at the time was. Labor might have been cheap. They might not have had, unions. They might have had access to resources through Dino De Laurentiis's studio with like backlots and stuff. I don't know how much was shot on location, how much was just like, we'll just walk 20 feet that way and we're now on a new set. And then we just put a matte painting in front of the camera and now we're like on another planet. We're underwater. We're in a cave. We're in whatever. So I think it was a point of pride more than anything else. Anyways, with that digression, I think we may have exhausted most of what we have to say, at least what we have floating around in our heads this evening, as far as the film Danger Diabolik is concerned. So if you don't have any objections, do you want to move on to the adjudication phase?
Not at all. And I think we'll go with the more obvious judgment, which will be my own. I've I'm not a fan of the film, obviously. I feel it is pretty janky in terms of music, tone, pacing. It
Your mom is
has
Jakey.
no real development. Am I supposed to argue that? She doesn't watch the show. I don't have to. It's not something that's going to live on in time. That is absolutely for sure. I feel that there's a lot of context that you need in order to care about the characters that the movie is not giving you. And there's just so many places where it could be improved. It is museum piece at best.
I knew that you didn't love it when we were just, talking by text before recording. I think you watched it a couple of days ago, but I didn't know if you'd go museum piece at best. I think I'm a little surprised by that. I do disagree with you as far as you say, its ability to last. I mean, the film came out in '68. It is now 2022. So we're already talking, we're closing in on 60 years here.
Oh, whether or not something's shown 60 years later and people talk about it as being great, that means nothing to me in terms of ability to last.
I think it's I think its style and its sort of counterculture pop art sensibilities. I think the fact that it is kind of campy is part of the reason why people still have fun with the movie. It's a cult classic for a reason. I had a lot of fun with it. It has me curious to check out the original comics. I don't even know if we have Diabolik printed in English. It might only be available in Italian. It was a gas. A lot of people have called it a masterpiece. I don't know if I could go there. I think I am going to be settling on museum piece for this one just because it is a little janky. I mean, I can't say this movie isn't a little janky. It's part of its charm. It's part of why I enjoy it. But yeah, I think it's more of a pop artifact and definitely an interesting, fascinating piece of cinematic history. And for the comic book audience, it is definitely it's in that sort of higher echelon of adaptations that should be looked at and discussed. So it also kind of I feel like it sits on a number of different shelves in the archive, so to speak. But yeah, definitely more generous and forgiving than your museum piece.
Because when I say it sits on a number of shelves, it's because no one's really allowed to throw it out, but they don't want it around.
It just keeps getting moved.
What I find a little funny is when you were talking about how everyone loved it, I remember reading how it wasn't that popular in its time, but it got that cult following in time. And I remember reading how it moved hands a couple times in terms of direction and director, and that caused some of the money issues. And I'll trust you a heck of a lot more though than some random article I read quickly.
I happen to have the Wikipedia page just open here on my phone, like literally to a relevant comment that I will just kind of belch out here. Basically, in a 2012 issue of Film International, John Barra noted the film had initially been left to languish in obscurity since its staggered international release at the end of the 60s. So, yeah, I mean, it was not received terribly well. It is one of those things that until it got discovered later, like it existed mostly as a kitsch reference point or as an easy target for tongue-in-cheek parody. And
Or
it
it's something for
cites
the Beastie Boys to sample, apparently.
yeah, it cites both the Mystery Science Theater and the Body Movin' music video as examples because, like, here we go. Now we're going to get the Body Movin' story. So Adam Yauch of the Beastie Boys, he was saying that they were watching like old movies, and he always thought it was interesting how you'd have these action scenes where the close-ups are all the actor, and then the wide shots are the stunt person. And a lot of times you can just really tell it's a stunt person, and then it cuts to the main actor again. And he thought that was funny, so they wanted to make a video where they're like, let's create this scenario where we do that. And instead of cutting to like a stunt person per se, they were cutting to actual like clips of the film Diabolik.
That's how you do it.
And And I think it's a combination of Bava as a filmmaker and Bava's body of work probably drew some attention to the film, plus the Beastie Boys video, the Mystery Science Theater. I think Mystery Science Theater probably has not necessarily resurrected, but definitely drawn some attention to some weirdo.
And hey, when like Manos, the Hand of Fate, has a certain amount of popularity, it is not because it's a good film. It's because it's a bad film that everybody knows. There's some times when just being known creates a popularity. It's famous for being famous.
And
And
I
I
think
wonder if that's almost where this manages to sneak in.
and I think people going back to visit this film either for the first time or revisiting it, they're noticing, the rich, colorful compositions. They're noticing the playfulness of the movie, the sensuality of the movie, the way that it is, in its own way, an homage and a send up of like the big James Bond set piece kind of thing. It lives in this 1960s space that will always have its fans. It has a little bit of that spy-fi Euro pulp noir that like the Avengers, the 60s Avengers series did. It's got a lot of quirky, crazy things in it that I think are very easy for people to look at and analyze and interrogate and just kind of have fun with. And when you don't have to take a movie too seriously, I think that also really helps. When you can just have fun with it, you don't have to sit there and be like, well, that doesn't look like an actual plane flying in an actual sky, and that takes me out of the movie, and I hate this, and I'm going to bitch about it on the internet and burn down my house because the world sucks. You just kind of go, look at that plane. And then you take a sip of your drink and you just keep watching the movie.
Which sounds to me a bit more like so bad it's good.
I think the movie does transcend the so bad it's good because I don't think it's actively bad. I think it's actively campy. Now, if you think campy is bad, then sure.
I think it's actively mediocre. Nothing was there to grab me. There's some stuff that's done well. Yes, the visuals are done quite well. And if you ignore the stuff that is of the era and special effects capabilities, which I do, like it doesn't bother me when they speed up the cars. It's just something that I think is amusing. But there was nothing for me to latch on to that it ended up not being fun. And as punishment, we'll see if a Serbian film stays in the rankings next year.
Fair enough.
The person who voted for it, the only person, said it was her favorite film of the ones that she voted for. So
insane.
And she also voted for Vertigo and Citizen Kane.
I'd be curious. There was a 2021 film, another adaptation of Diabolik, but made much more recently, and it's much more in a, I think, serious kind of like serious comic book movie vein.
Hopefully not too serious, because they decided in North America to make everything all serious and dark and gritty and gray and brown, which isn't how you create quality. Just because one movie did it and it worked out well for them.
I was expecting you, Inspector.
I knew you wouldn't be able to resist seeing him.
Please. Give me a few seconds more. Alone.
So there you have it, folks. That's 2 museum piece votes, but 2 museum piece votes on very opposite kind of sides of that spectrum.
Different museums. One's perhaps in the Louvre. One is in the Louvre's warehouse 400 blocks away.
Or it's in the P.T. Barnum. It's in like a P.T. Barnum freak show.
Come see the Diabolik. Come on.
That's pretty good, dude.
If only I had more words to actually say, it would sound a lot better.
We'd love to hear what you guys think about the film and what you think about our thoughts on the film. Hit us up on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that jazz. You can find us at FYC Show or For Your Consideration on all those platforms. And while you're there, if there is an opportunity to rate and or review the show, please do so. It helps with the algorithms and it helps get the show into the eyes and ears of people who might enjoy this content but have no idea we exist, like most of my family.
They know I exist. They just ignore me, as many are wont to do. But hopefully you guys don't ignore us next month, as we are moving into our yearly Halloween Spooktacular Fright Fests.
Woo woo!
This, that, other thing. Need more words to add to it.
October Fright Fest Spooktacular.
I feel like we need more words now. It's gotta grow. Like all sequels, you have to keep adding more and more, and that's how it gets better, right?
Maybe it will be the October Fright Fest Spooktacular, The Reckoning.
Part 2.
Part 2.
Where this year we will be exploring video games that have been made into movies, in particular of the horror genre.
And the films that we have picked for that are going to be, in order of discussion, Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark. I never thought we'd be talking about Avable.
You're the one who really wanted to do that one, so I'm throwing you under the bus right now.
I know. I've never seen it, and this was like an excuse to do it without it being an actual choice of mine. We're going to follow that up with Doom, and then we're going to top it all off with Silent Hill, the Christoph Gans film, which...
as opposed to Silent Hill,
The Reckoning? What is it called? Silent Hill 3D?
Silent Hill Revelations 3D?
Revelations, that's what it is.
I knew there was going to be problems when there was a 3D in the title. I had time to prepare.
Hey, Dread 3D is fantastic.
But Dread 3D is not a horror movie made as a 3D film.
Touche.
Name a horror movie with 3D in the title that's quality.
Touche.
It's one of Valmo's nightclubs. We have it surrounded.
So be sure to catch up with us next month for that. Last year we only did kind of one episode encompassing a few things. We're sort of back on our one episode a week in October, which is kind of our tradition. So looking forward to that, looking forward to these movies, looking forward to getting to chat with Dustin a little more frequently, at least for 30 days.
I do miss my mic hangout times.
Oh. So until then, I hope everybody stays well, stays happy. I have been your host, Mike Josic.
And I've been your other host, Dustin Friesenand.
We hope to see you again next time.
On For Your Consideration.
Bye-bye.
Ta-ta. And you see, when I was talking about the first impression, I probably should have gone with the Sideshow Barker.